Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weekly overlook. Currently, I'm going to be covering the weather for June 4th of 2023 just to start off, and then I'll get into weather for the rest of the week. So today, there is a little bit of uncertainty, especially with this marginal threat in particular, but we do have a marginal threat for from Tennessee across the Appalachian Mountains down into Tennessee, parts of western North Carolina into northern Alabama and Georgia, as well as a marginal threat for southern Texas into the Rio Grande Valley. Our threats for these locations include practically no tornado threat at all, but we do have both 5% wind threats and 5% hail threats. However, this 5% hail threat is mostly isolated to the Appalachian region, where strong updrafts along the mountains can exist and support hail development. Taking a look at our pivotal weather model, starting off with the 500 millibars for today, let's first start off with the marginal threat that is in southern Texas. The subtropical jet is continuing to move across southern Texas and trigger severe weather development, but because of how weak the wind flow is, shear is likely going to be very limited. Which is going to impact the hail potential a little bit, regardless of how much CAPE we have, making hail likely going to be in the small to medium sizes, where we likely won't see any hail in the large to very large sizes, regardless of CAPE values. Taking a look at the marginal threat back in Tennessee, there has been a little bit of uncertainty with this one, but I'm thinking that the trigger should be mostly a combination of outflow boundaries as well as very hot temperatures and CAPE values to help prolong severe weather development across the Tennessee area. Even the pivotal weather models have been a little bit of decisive if it's really going to be more intense than the surrounding environment around it. So again, there has been some uncertainty. For tomorrow, there should be a marginal threat for the North Carolina and South Carolina region past the Appalachian Mountains along the leeward side. The trigger should be this blast coming out of Canada, as well as a little bit of leeward troughing to help trigger severe weather development. This should also provide a little bit of shear to help possibly allow for some small to medium-sized hail, as well as some strong outflow gusts. Taking a look at the dew points, let's start off with a marginal threat for the Tennessee region. We do have fairly moderate dew points in the low 60s to mid and upper 50s, as well as with whatever lapse rates we have, should possibly keep CAPE values mostly in the moderates. This will help prolong severe weather development with the outflow boundaries. I think severe weather development is likely going to be very weak for today, and I don't really think it's going to be all that strong and all that much of an increase compared to rain showers around that. I just think it's going to be slightly more intense, but really not all that much more intense. But then let's take a look at the marginal threat for the Texas region. We have dew points that are in the mid to upper 60s in some regions, and it is displaying some 70s in some areas. However, because of the lack of 70s that are widespread, I think 70s are going to be unlikely. So I think dew points are mostly going to stay in the mid 60s to upper 60s. This is going to help with CAPE values depending on our lapse rates, possibly in the 1,000 to 250 range, possibly higher. But I don't think it's going to go any higher than that, but it is possible. Taking a look at the lapse rates now, let's start off with the marginal threat that's down in Texas. We do have fairly weak lapse rates, fairly moderate lapse rates, mostly in the 6 to weak 70s, and then that's pretty much the same thing for the marginal threat in Tennessee in the Appalachian Mountains. It's mostly moderate lapse rates, which are going to keep CAPE values probably mostly in the moderates. So I don't think we're going to see CAPE values in the 30s because of this. Taking a look at the instability, starting off with the marginal threat that's in Tennessee, we get CAPE values that are mostly in the moderates, somewhere in the triple digits to weak 1000s, not really all that strong in the 2000s we pretty much don't see Cape values in the 2000s at all. But then let's take the marginal threat that could be possible for tomorrow. Cape values do mostly stay in the moderates as well, possibly the week 2000s, but I think that might be a little bit unlikely. Mostly in the 1,500 to triple digits range. With the whatever shear we possibly have, this could allow for some small hail to develop. But then let's take a look at the marginal threat down in Texas. Cape values are mostly in the moderates, the 1000s to 2000s and 500 range. Not really all that much in the 3000s. However, it is depicting it a little bit. I think it is going to be unlikely that we're going to see Cape values in the 3000s range because of the lack of sufficient lapse rates. These Cape values could possibly allow for some strong damaging gusts, as well as possibly some small hail with relatively weak wind shear, as well as some small hail could be possible back in Tennessee, as well as some strong outflow gusts. Taking a look at wind shear, I'm mostly looking at this because I want to get an idea of the possibility for some small to medium-sized hail in some regions of the United States of those marginal threats. However, I am not concerned about strong wind shear associated with tornadic possibilities because of overall how weak the flow is across the jet stream in the United States. So let's start off with a marginal threat that's down through southern Texas. You can see a little bit of blues in some areas, which could allow for some isolated small hail in some regions. However, it does look like it's going to be a little bit unlikely because of how weak the blues are. So, I mean, it could allow for the possibility of some very small hail to develop in some isolated regions. It overall doesn't look all that possible. But then let's take a look at the marginal threat back in Tennessee. Keep in mind the hail threat for that marginal threat was mostly isolated to this region. We could possibly see some small hail across the rest of the Appalachian Mountains as the mountains block it, allowing for some weak wind shear to develop regardless of mid-level flow strength. So this wind shear does look like it is sufficient enough for the possibility of some small hail in the mountains. So and possibly some small medium-sized hail, but again, nowhere across the spectrum is wind shear going to be sufficient enough for tornadic development at all across anywhere in the United States. So again, tornadoes are not a threat for today or tomorrow. But then, let's take a look at the wind shear for the possible marginal threat tomorrow. So, wind shear does look like it is sufficient enough for some small to medium-sized hail, possibly some small, large-sized hail, but it might be a little bit unlikely. Mostly going to stay probably in the medium sizes, depending on our cape tomorrow. Small hail to medium-sized hail could be possible, but I think tornadoes are going to be unlikely. Now that we got that over with, let's take a look at the possibilities for weather across the rest of the United States for the rest of the week. So let's start off with the 500 millibars so we can look at our triggering factors and where we could possibly see some severe weather development across the rest of the week. Increasing mid-level flow down out of Canada could possibly trigger some showers to develop across the eastern United States, pushing them down south and pushing along instability and moisture with them. But because it's coming out of Canada, it's likely pulling some drier and cooler air out of Canada. Because of this, severe potentials are likely going to not be all that great across the eastern United States for the rest of the week. Mostly just the possibility of rain showers because of this long wave trough moving through the area. But then let's take a look at the low pressure system along the western coast of the United States. For much of this week, this low pressure system is likely going to pull the subtropical jet a little bit to the north, stopping the subtropical jet from going across Texas and triggering severe weather development there. Is likely going to go north and trigger possibly some rain showers through California and maybe in Las Vegas and Arizona. But because of how dry the environment is, it's likely going to not have all that much of a severe potential. Severe weather development in the west is likely not going to be all that strong with this low pressure system. But then as this low pressure system begins to weaken, by Thursday, we could see our next severe weather potential as the subtropical jet begins to pass over Texas again, triggering severe weather development. So by Thursday through Saturday, we could possibly see our next severe weather possibilities again through Thursday through Saturday, because of the subtropical jet now being let free to flow over Texas and trigger severe weather development. We could possibly maybe even see a little bit of a tornado threat associated with this, as the subtropical jet does look like it is sufficient enough for sufficient wind shear to develop, but that depends on Cape as well. So we'll take a look at that later. So keep in mind this going into Thursday and Saturday. Let's take a look at the dew points for the rest of the week so we can possibly get an idea of how our instability might look. Let's take a look at the eastern United States to start off with, because of that jet coming out of Canada. So you see how this jet is pushing on all the moisture, pushing it southward along the eastern United States. Further west, because of the wind flow coming south, pulling dry air out of Canada. Because this is pulling drier air out of Canada, severe potentials are likely not going to be all that great again. Mostly just the possibility of rain showers without all that much of a severe potential, because of how it's not pulling up moisture or pulling in moisture. It's pushing it out. So severe weather potential is likely not going to be all that great associated with this. Cape values could potentially mostly stay in the moderates because of our dew points mostly being in the mid 60s to possibly the upper 60s in some areas, but again, and also the upper 50s. But this also depends on lapse rates. These dew points, with whatever Cape values we have, could potentially fuel some small rain showers to develop across much of the United States. These are mostly going to be fueled by deep moisture and very hot temperatures and surface heating from the hot summer days, as well as with that moisture. So keep that in mind going into much of this week. Rain showers are definitely possible across much of the United States. They are likely going to be mostly isolated, but let's take a look at the dew points for the western United States, keeping in mind that low pressure system that is expected to move onto the western United States. You can see that it does not really pull all that much moisture out of the Pacific into Arizona and Utah and Nevada. So severe weather potential is likely, again, going to be not all that great in the western United States with weak dew points and that low pressure system, likely going to trigger possibly some rain showers across California. But then let's take a look going forward at that severe potential from Thursday into Saturday. These dew points definitely look like they could possibly trigger some very strong instability, possibly in the 3000s, depending on our lapse rates. So again, severe weather potential could be possible going from Thursday into Saturday. Let's then take a look at the lapse rate so we can possibly get an idea of Cape before we look at it, keeping in mind our dew points. So let's take a look at the eastern United States to start off with. Lapse rates are mostly on the weaker side. Keep in mind those dew points that are kind of in the 60s to upper 50s. This is possibly going to keep Cape values a little bit down, probably in the weaker moderates to possibly the low 2000s in some areas. Again, surface heating could possibly play a role in this and bump up those Cape values a little bit and get them into the 2,500 range, but it might be a little bit unlikely. It all depends, really. But then let's take a look at Texas specifically. Lapse rates do mostly stay in the very weak values. They're not even in the moderates at all. So surface heating and dew points are going to have to do most of the work in creating instability. And I don't think lapse rates are really going to play all that much of a role in this in Cape values before Thursday. But then let's take a look at Cape values going into Thursday through Saturday. Lapse rates do increase sufficiently in the 7s to 8s, possibly the 9s in some very small regions. This is going to contribute to instability with our dew points in the 3000s are possible, possibly the mid 3000s. It really all depends, as models definitely could change before this time, so we're gonna have to wait and see. But it is definitely possible for Cape values to reach and exceed the 3000s in some areas, possibly the mid 3000s, and that's going to definitely allow for some severe weather potential going from Thursday into Saturday. Let's take a look at our instability going forward into the rest of the week. Keep in mind our lapse rates and our dew points. So a lot of the instability is mostly going to stay mostly in the moderate range. There are some areas with possibly some increased lapse rates that do reach the 2,500s in some areas, but they do mostly stay in the 1,000s, triple digits to week 2,000s. We don't really see a whole lot in the 2,000s, 500 to 3,000s range because of how weak lapse rates are. But then taking a look at Texas going forward, past Thursday, when those stronger lapse rates arrive, Cape just grows exponentially. You can see Cape values already in the 3000s, even the mid 3000s, the low 3000s in some areas, and it looks like it increases across the spectrum as days go on. And you see Cape values possibly get really close to the 4000s in some areas across Texas. So this is really going to fuel our severe weather development going into Thursday to Saturday and possibly even next week. And I will cover you guys on that next week. We could possibly see tons of severe weather next week, but I'll be sure to cover that on Sunday this week. So stay tuned for that, because this could be really bad severe weather next week. So stay tuned. We could also have, again, some really bad severe weather from Thursday to Saturday because of lapse rates that are relatively stronger compared to last week, and we got enhanced risks with very large hail and multiple tornadoes. So we're gonna have to wait and see for Thursday and Saturday, but tornadoes could definitely be possible depending on our wind shear, and our wind shear could possibly be sufficient enough for some very large hail to develop, as well as tornadic development. Taking a look at the wind shear, keep in mind our Cape values that we just took a look at. Let's focus on Texas for now. So from Thursday to Saturday, we can see wind shear values in the 30 knots to possibly the week 40 knots in some reaches, and that is expected to increase over time as days go forward. From I think we're currently looking at Sunday right now. So before Sunday, through Thursday and Saturday, this wind shear is definitely sufficient enough for some large hail to develop with that Cape values that we have, possibly the 1 to 2 inches possibly. But then this wind shear is also definitely sufficient enough for some tornadic development. We could possibly see some 2% to 5% going into Thursday through Saturday with this wind shear. So tornadoes are definitely possible going into Thursday to Saturday. Before I end today's forecast, I do want to touch a little bit going into next week. I know I said I would have forecasted it next Sunday, but I do want to touch a little bit on it right now. But keep in mind, because I am looking 2 weeks ahead now, models are definitely very much subject to change, and probably will change by the time next week rolls around. But this upper level ridge is expected to weaken going into the next few days of this week. By next week, it is, I think, expected to completely demolish or move north into Canada. This subtropical jet is expected to get really strong going into next week, and allow for very strong shear and definitely tornado potentials going into next week. This subtropical jet with mid-level flow in the 78 knots, that could be wind shear in the 50 knots. But again, this is very much subject to change and could definitely change by next week goes around, and probably will change. So we probably will see tornado potentials. They may not get as high as what I'm saying they will, but we definitely probably will see tornado potentials going into next week. So that's what I really wanted to talk about before I end this forecast. So keep that in mind going into next week. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the show source for Project Gladiator and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. And hopefully I will see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.